And as children, they grew up in war. They grew up in refugee camps. They never had a chance to play. They learned about hatred. They learned about violence. They learned about weapons at a very young age. And never in their life did they really have the chance to experience hope or opportunity. And I really started thinking about this. It was actually in 2005. There was a massive earthquake in Pakistan. It was very devastating. October 8th at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, earthquake struck. 18,000 children in school died and perished within a few minutes. And I spent several months in the earthquake area, and I came back in January 2006. And I was quite traumatized. It's very difficult to go into areas and see so much suffering and devastation and people dying. You can't even do anything about it. And my daughter, Mira, she asked me why I'm so sad. And I said, Mira, I can't even tell you what I've seen. But it's just, it's just too much. And then she very point blank, she said, do the kids have anywhere to play? And I said, of course not, Amir. They're traumatized. They're going through mourning and suffering. And she persisted and said, you need to put a playground and give those kids something to play with. So I actually got help from Jeff McMillan, who's from Gold's Gym in Montana, in Bozeman. He, along with Amira, they raised money to buy 10,000 skipping ropes in Pakistan, also cricket sets, volleyballs, badmintons, all those things. And so in the spring of 2006 in Neelam Valley, all these things came to play with. And guess what? First the kids were happy, and then the adults started to get happy, and the whole region started to blossom with joy and hope because the kids started to play. And when you really start thinking about this, very powerful what play can do, and it's also a place where children can learn about arbitration, disputes, and negotiating. And the last place, which is the narrative arc of Stones into Schools, this place is called Buzai Gumbad. It's in a very extreme northeast Afghanistan. Just to get there, first you go to Kabul, however you want to get to Kabul. Then you drive 40 hours in a Jeep driving time. That takes about 3 days. And then you get on horseback and go for 5 days, and then you reach Buzai Gumbad. But I think in the Yukon, isn't there places that take that long to get there too? Anyways, that's why I like being in Canada. Anyways, in 1999, I made a promise to the people from there who had come over a pass that I would help them build a school. But it took a decade. And last fall, I tried to reach Buzai Gumbad to help completing the school. I got very ill and I couldn't reach there. I asked the military for help. They said it's too remote an area, it's too difficult to get there. I asked the Afghan government, I asked the Pakistan, Chinese, Tajik government for help. Nobody could help. And as I lay there ill, guess what happened? The people themselves, determinedly, they said, we're going to get the school built. Their leader, Abdul Rashid Khan, who's their commander, he was very gravely ill, and they wanted to make sure they got a school built before he died. And what happened was a school got built. There was no help from the outside, no international support. They entirely built the school on their own. All we helped with was some teachers who've been there for several years. And when you think about it, that essence is the real, I think, solution. The people themselves can be empowered. Well, I was at a 4th grade class in Texas about 2.5 years ago, and these poor kids were trying to read the adult book, 3 Cups of Tea. So I called my wife, and she said, well, you're going to have to write a young reader's book. So at home, I have about 2,000 emails and letters with criticisms and complaints and all those things about 3 Cups of Tea. So I actually went through them very carefully. In the young reader's book, we have a timeline, a glossary, who's who, more charts, more diagrams, more photos, more maps, and 20 pages by my daughter, Mira. And one of the questions asked of Mira is, so what's it like the day your dad leaves to go overseas for several months? What's it like? So Amira writes, well, we wake up, we're kind of sad, we take Daddy to the airport, we give him a hug, we cry a bit but not a ton, and as the day goes on we get happier because we know when we get home, Daddy will be there because he missed his flight, and it's a true story. This is a quote. I love quotes, and I love librarians, a lot of other things, but this is a quote that I often I think about when I get somewhat despondent. It's by Martin Luther King Jr. He said, even if the world ends tomorrow, I'm going to plant my seed today. It's easy to live in fear. It's easy to exude trepidation to our children. But I also think there's real hope if we really learn, listen, and support and respect our elders and look to children as a road to peace for the future. So even if the world ends tomorrow, let's remember to plant our seeds today. And as I mentioned before, I love libraries. When I'm home every Saturday, we go like clockwork to the library with our family. I'd really encourage you to support the library. I'm going to take, I don't have that much money, but I'm going to take $5,000 from the profit of the book here, and I'm going to make it donate a check to the Toronto Public Library Foundation. And I'd like all of you to encourage you, even if it's just $1 or some pennies, maybe do a pennies for peace, but pennies for your Toronto libraries here. I really think it's important we support our librarians. We're going to have just 2 or 3 questions, and also a lot of you want to know about some political issues. So I'm going to very quickly just run through them. But actually, politics I think is very low on the totem pole. So as you heard before, but politics will never bring peace, but people bring peace. My main concern about when President Obama met with our military generals and some of our political leaders, they had 9 meetings to determine whether or not we should deploy more troops to Afghanistan. But one of the problems is that they met in secrecy. They met behind closed doors. They had 9 meetings. There was no public testimony. There was no hearings on Capitol Hill. The media was not invited to these meetings. You cannot run a democracy in secrecy. A democracy, in Canada too, you had a little issue here in Ottawa, remember last week? Really, people that govern and I think should determine the future. The other thing that really bothered me is that the Shura, or the elders of Afghanistan, were never consulted. If we're going to help a country, don't you think the elders should be consulted in that country? And one thing that has been a real joy to me is to have dozens of meetings with the elders in Shura. And one thing they will tell you, the top thing that they will stress, they will say, please do not bomb and kill civilians. That is their number 1 request. One thing that Vice President of our country, Joe Biden, is recommending is to pull troops and do more targeted selected bombings. But I can tell you that bombing is not a substitute for pulling troops. You will kill civilians and you will antagonize people. It's not worth 20 dead Al-Qaeda if 1 civilian is killed. It's not worth it, and bombings is not a substitute for troops. The other thing is, if you do bomb, you need intelligence, so it's not going to work anyways. And really, what we really all need to do, I think, is have more tea. Also, diplomacy, half of diplomacy is just showing up. You don't have to agree. You don't have to have any consensus. You don't have to have any plan. You just have to show up, have some tea, and start talking, debating. And that's where I think in many ways the military in Canada and the US, they really get it. Many of our soldiers have been deployed in Afghanistan 3 or 4 times. And from the top down, one of the top priorities in the military now is to build relationships, to listen. And I'd like that also our political leaders start to do that. The US, we've only had Secretary Clinton has only been over once for a few hours to Pakistan, Afghanistan. Our vice president was only there for a couple hours. He met with the leader and military people. Our top 3 military commanders in the US, they have been in Afghanistan and Pakistan more than 36 times in the last year. Admiral Mike Mullen was in Afghanistan just 3 weeks ago. He spent 3 days there, and all he did was listen to the elders. Some of them, they got very angry at him. They yelled at him. They were pointing fingers at him, and also some of them were praising him. And he just sat there and took notes. And I think that's what all of us, especially our leaders, can do. We can start listening and learning from the elders, and that really is a key to peace. In Afghanistan, the central government is very corrupt, is very fragile, it's very fickle, and the real power base is with the elders and the Shura. And that's, I think, a key to that we have to listen and we have to learn, especially from wise old men like Haji Ali. So I would like to, I'm just so grateful to be here. I'm also to spend more time in Canada. I haven't been here in many years, but now this year I'm coming 4 times to Canada, and I'm looking forward to being with many students and librarians and the communities. And also I'm really grateful to Canada for starting at the Ottawa Treaty, the ban on landmines in the world.